items of minutes to go through. So first one is the minutes from the previous meeting held on the 6th of March, and some subordinate minutes as well. Looking for those.
So that's the minutes for you to sign from our last meeting.
Have we accepted these already?
Oh no, so it's just any comments.
Any comments? Good to accept?
Yeah.
Good. That's good.
And it's just to accept the supporting role for working party minutes as well.
Yeah. I wasn't clear on the follow-up actions from these. There's 3 areas of concern were highlighted in section 5.2. I wasn't clear whether these were actions or what. Five point two.
So, Chair, I can pick that up and answer that one. So, those are sort of concerns that were discussed in the previous dementia-friendly Harpenham Working Party, and they're issues that I know the Working Party still got at the forefront of their mind, and are looking at ways in which they can help people with dementia across those issues. A good example being around transportation and parking, the issues around Amenby Lane car park that came about earlier on this year, where there was discussions that the Working Party and indeed the Council were hoping to secure some relocation of some spaces to help people with dementia to access some of the services in town. So these are issues that the Working Party still has at the forefront of its mind.
Okay, that's fine. Any other questions or comments? Are we okay to accept the minutes of this meeting, please? Yes. Second set of minutes from the Vulnerable People Working Party. Any questions or comments? Pages 7 and 8. Yep. Are we okay to accept? Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, then moving on to section 7, which takes us into the officers' reports, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the first item is the board planner and resolution tracker. So all the items on the resolution tracker from our last meeting have been marked as complete. And the main item for the next meeting in September will be when we start to look at the budget for next financial year. The committee may wish to note that once the statement of accounts and year-end items are approved tonight, there will then go to council for final approval in a couple of weeks. But have to take any questions.
So this item are just approving or noting the updated forward planner and the resolution tracker.
That's correct, Chair.
Is that
yes, please.
Okay. So everyone okay to note these items? That is a yes. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Very good. So if we can move on to item 7.2, please.
Okay, so that's the budgetary control for last financial year. The report presents the provisional outturn for last financial year. It's unlikely to occur, but the reason it's called the provisional outturn is because there may be changes post-audit, but there won't be any further changes made unless we're instructed to by then. If I can draw your attention to the table on page 18, which summarises the variances that have occurred last financial year. So the overall variance is 898,000, but just to point out that 750 of those are due to projects that have been approved and the money released, but haven't happened yet. So it's just purely a timing issue. So if you like, the kind of the area to focus on is the 147,000 favourable variance, which you can see in the middle of the page, and is all broken down there. The majority of the variances are things that we've spoken about before in previous meetings, like the investment interest and the commercial income generated in Rothampstead. The full amount of this has been added to earmarked reserves of this 137,000, and that's all been allocated to specific projects, which we will cover later on in the pack when we look at the statement of accounts. But I think I'll pause there and happy to take any questions.
Is that so? Because I know there's some different time periods covered. It's capital projects. Under the reserve movements, it says rephased into 22 to 25. Is that?
That's a typo, but I may thank you, Chair.
Sorry.
Time machine. Any further forward in getting a new junior ranger?
It's still in discussion. It's still something we very much want to. I think it's likely to be, with the time of year we're in now, there's not going to be anything happening at least until September, but it's still an ambition for point one. But I think it's definitely, now we've started with the Ranger service from April, it's interesting to see how things are actually working. So whether there'll be a final decision made in September, but it's still definitely an ambition to have an apprentice.
Right.
Any other comments or questions regarding the outturn, or provisional outturn?
No.
Is everyone okay to note the report from Daniel? Noted. Thank you very much. Precisely so. Year-end accounts. So take us through, please, Daniel.
No problem. Thank you, Chair. So I'm hoping the monitoring report that you've just reviewed shows that we're in a strong financial position. Just to confirm that our general reserve budget, we've got over 4.5 months of our net revenue expenditure. So we're in a very healthy position. The earmarked reserves that I spoke about in the last item, you can see on page 40, the breakdown of those. So towards the right-hand side of the column, the transfer to reserves, that's everything that we've added in. So that's the 147,000. On page 32 is the same information that you've seen on the budgetary control, shown in a slightly different way, and that's pretty much what a lot of the information is. Also, committee may wish to note that on our balance sheet, on our fixed assets, this includes all of the new vehicles that we've purchased to help support our town ranger team. But the storage depot, where the paperwork hasn't been finalised yet for that yet, that's not included in these figures, and will hopefully be added next financial year. There's a lot of numbers, so I think I'll pause there and have to take any questions.
It might go back to Appendix B from your report. There seems to be a lot of capital projects. I just sort of saw that figure and thought, oh, what have we not bought yet? But I suppose it is the storage depot, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the main thing, yeah.
That's on page 21. It's your Appendix B. So yeah, I think wonder whether that linked. And the other question I had about the income and expenditure account, the only figure that looked sort of remarkably elevated from last year was the tree management. And I know we've obviously got loads of trees and we have to spend money on trees because it's important that they're looked after. And I do get all of that. But it just looked like a huge increase, and I wondered what the reasoning for that was.
I think we've got the the main reason for, well, there's several reasons for it. Obviously, inflation being a big part of it. There was the tree works in Lydekker Park that rolled over to the beginning of this financial year. That was a high expense, and as well, there's the big health and safety review that's done. Is it?
Every 18 months.
Every 18 months. So it's a bit of a timing issue where you do get.
Depends what year that falls into.
Yeah.
So next year we'll probably see it going down again potentially. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so the proactive work, we might see that go down. Of course, the other side to the tree management is the reactive stuff. So things that come up completely unexpected, like Church Green recently with that tree having to be removed, and that's, you know, not insignificant amounts of money if you get half a dozen of those, which you could easily do when we've got 31,000 trees. So
Yeah.
Do we tender all of that, like the tree surgeons, or do we just get whoever's available on the day? How?
So, Chair, there's two sides to it. So our health and safety work is tendered, so a large proportion of that. So Community Services Committee, if you have a look at that pack, they've actually got the tender for the next lot of work going next week. Where it's urgent health and safety work, we will instruct an appropriate contractor, and at times we will, within the financial regs, get a certain number of quotes depending on the type of work. Fairly often, sort of majority of the time, the reactive work is urgent health and safety work. So we don't concern ourselves too much with multiple quotes when we need to get sort of a tree down. We do have some really trusted contractors that we work with, and of course we always sort of sense check prices and that. But actually, in the case of tree management, the quality of the work is actually really important as well. Even if you're felling a tree, you know, the quality of it and how they carry out that work, the traffic management, the sort of what they leave behind you can get various sort of quality differences in that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I think you've done a very nice job on the by the fountain by Pizza Express. I know you haven't finished the whole job yet, but what you've done so far looks really good, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. So, any further questions regarding the 23-24 accounts?
No, all right.
Okay. Right. So we're okay to note and approve the accounts.
Sorry, Richard.
Thank you very much. Right, next item. So our internal audit report, please, Ben.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm really pleased to say we've received substantial assurance from our internal auditors. You can see that on page 49 of your pack. Hopefully this gives everyone reassurance that all the numbers reported in the previous couple of items are correct. I have to take any questions.
So well done. I felt really proud.
Let's run this, please.
Page 51. It's a blank page.
I think it's the standard report that SIAS give, and it includes that, but there's never any information on it. I think they provide it, so I include it, but I think in the years that I've been here, it's always been provided, but it's not. So I think it's part of their standard template, but it's the information is in the earlier on in their report.
Yeah, it's a bit odd, to be honest. I mean, other audit reports I see, you know, there are ticks all over the place.
So I think I agree with Councillor Ellis on this. It seems a bit of an odd thing just to. I mean, I get the fact that it's a template, but this is an actual report. This is an actual report, so I'll just query.
Yeah, I can certainly go back to them and query that.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Ellis. That's a very good point. Thank you. I mean, presumably, if the headline outcome is substantial, then presumably there will be ticks in all of the substantial columns on the page.
Well, you would certainly hope so, or at least the majority.
Yes.
Yeah. Columns. This doesn't tell us, what areas we ought to be looking at.
Yeah, I think this table just put certain ticks on the substantial column. I think most of the points is covered in the summary. Yeah, but I agree with it makes other councillor easier to read.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, that's certainly feedback back.
It's reassuring. It shows that you're honest, because if you weren't, you'd ticked it all yourself and spoken.
Yeah. I was expecting to say it was colour coded in so it's all right, it sells in blue or something. I had another question, which was about the audit commentary. So section 1.6, it mentions that the financial regulations and standing orders are reviewed annually, and actually we'll be talking about those shortly. Does the scope of the audit actually include a review of the financial regulations and standing orders?
No, it's just to make sure that we've met what we've set out to. So where we say they're going to be reviewed every year, to make sure that this committee and council have actually carried out their review. They don't pass their opinion on our financial regulations.
Okay. Right, so the scope is, are you reviewing it as opposed to this is our review and this is what, okay, that's fair enough. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Please. Okay. So I guess I'm just trying to gauge the materiality of the point quite rightly raised by Councillor Ellis. Councillor Ellis, in your judgment, could we note this report in the absence of the completion of page 51? Or?
Yes, I think we can note it. I'm not asking for an answer, this evening. But I think somebody ought to come back on this, because particularly for things which are sort of like substandard, that we ought to be looking at as a committee. And the ones which are substantial, that's fine. We're happy with that. But if you've got limited ones or no's, even if there's only one or two of them, we ought to be looking at that. So if they can, if an answer to that can be provided, before obviously.
I think that's a very reasonable request. So could we just go back to the auditor, please, and just ask them to explain? And I think unless there's a good reason why not, I think we'd like future reports for that page to be completed.
Of course, check. It's fine.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, so just to close out, so is everyone okay to note the audit report? That's a yes. And yes, just to reinforce Councillor Fisher's point, well done to the team for a good job. Well done.
Thank you very much.
My goodness, right. So moving on to next item, financial regulations and standing orders.
Thank you very much. So as we just said, that there's a review of these done every 12 months. So once they're reviewed by yourselves, they'll be going to council for final approval at the next meeting. The report shows some minor tweaks that occurred following the review, and we've got an amendment to the agenda with a further amendment that the clerk can talk us through, if that's all right.
Okay, so Daniel, there's a lot here. So I have read it. I had to read it through twice because there's some few things to make sure that I understood. Daniel, how would you like to just do a page turn? Would you like to draw attention to any key topics?
I do, where there's no material changes that in the agenda that we're trying to make, so there's nothing particularly to highlight from me.
So can I propose as a process we just do a simple page turn? I'd just like to check in with everyone, and if there's no comments we'll keep moving, but I just want to give everyone an opportunity to ask a question or make a comment on the content. Okay, so I'm going to go with that. So we start, I guess, with page 59.
And I say, sorry, I do have a question before that, and it is a very, very simple one. So at 3.2 of page 57, who is the we that reviews them? Is that Daniel and Carl, or is it a team, or?
Yeah, so Chair, that's officers. Yeah, so anything in report where it says we, it will be
The officers,
the author of the report and officers.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. So if I come to propose, if we just go through The page turn. So page 59, there's a couple of changes at the bottom. I'll try and move at pace so we can all leave the building before midnight. So
1.6 troubled me because it says if they're breached, they may give rise to disciplinary proceedings. And I wondered on the basis that if there's failure and it brings the whole council into disrepute, why it was only may give rise to disciplinary procedure. It seemed to me it should be shall.
Yeah, Chair, it's a very logical point. The issue is with any disciplinary, you can't prejudge it by saying you're going to do something. So by having may, that then leads into the disciplinary process, which has very clear guides.
Yeah, I thought
so
yeah,
that's a fair point. I think though, sorry to be pedantic, but the proceeding is the process, it's not the outcome.
The outcome is within the disciplinary proceeding,
yeah,
which is very clear that from the start you
I mean, you can enter a disciplinary process presumably and exit that process being found not guilty or there's nothing to answer for.
Absolutely, yeah. So if you have financial regulations that say if something happens, this will happen to that individual, then essentially you are completely prejudicing your disciplinary procedures, which are there to investigate what happened and then make a judgment as to whether something didn't happen.
Yeah.
So you essentially would be opening yourselves up to employment tribunals for kind of predetermination on decisions around investigations to employee behaviour.
Understood and good advice. Thank you. Okay. Any further questions on page 59? Okay, let's move on to page 60. Comments or questions on page 60? That's no. Move on to page 61. And 62. No. Page 63. Please tell me if I'm going too quickly or too slowly. No comments on page 53. Okay, 54, please. 64, sorry. Moving, page 65. Okay. Please, Councillor Ellis.
4.8. What sort of items, unbudgeted items, are we looking at here that can't come through? What things are we looking at?
This includes the reactive events such as tree surgery. Like a tree falls down, we have to immediately intervene.
Yeah.
That would be one example.
Okay. But do we have any others?
Well, Jake, it's more of a kind of a principle because essentially we have budgets that we can apply expenditure to. You know, we've got green space management plans if something happens in our green spaces. It's more of that top one is more around, say, towards the end of the year, if a budget is already spent, essentially that works that we might need to do would be unbudgeted because there isn't the funding there to do it, basically. So it's those sort of, it's more of a principle in certain circumstances rather than a set of certain things that we might buy.
Okay.
So it's a buffer, you mean? Sorry.
It's a last resort kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, to be honest, Chair, on that particular one, there are plenty of other areas of the financial regulations that we would use ahead of that point in the case, because we have environments and we have other budgets that can be utilised for expenditure. So it's not used very often, that point A, which is partly why the suggestion is to change the first line of the in consultation bit, because it doesn't require consultation, because there are other areas of the financial regulations that already allow it to happen. That makes sense.
Okay, so the intention is you've got operational discretion, if that's the right word, within those limits to on points A and B
Yes.
to spend within those levels without referring back to the mayor or the deputy mayor or the chair.
If that's not used very often, then what would be the justification for increasing it from 10,000 to 25,000 on B?
So point A.
Yeah,
It's
it's
not
only
used very
5.
often.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. But
Point-
B,
point
B
B.
potentially is.
Yeah, point B is different. And again, because elsewhere in the financial regulations, the town clerk can already authorise spend of up to £25,000. So it's basically a conflict in that. So under our procurement table later on.
So it's on page 79, there's
Yeah.
a table at the bottom.
So sometimes when these documents evolve through reviews over the years,
Yeah, that isn't it? Yeah.
you know, things aren't always reflected and you get kind of conflict. So there is already the ability to approve up to a certain spend. So this change on the 4.8 is just bringing that in.
And that's budgeted anyway, isn't it?
And it's budgeted anyway, yeah. The other point, Chair, I would just make on that is that the council essentially continues to grow, and the growth certainly since I've been around in the last 8 years. The figures when we first sort of inherited this, that figure was probably somewhere down like £3,000 actually, and it was changed quite quickly because it probably wasn't that appropriate. But as the council grows and there's the sort of things that we purchase operationally or sort of standard day-to-day operational things cost a lot more now. And actually, that's these changes just try to reflect what we do on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. Any more questions on page 65, please? Pages 66. Right, move on to 67. '68.
I've never. Who's the deputy town clerk?
Yes, currently it's the role as the public realm and environment manager. If you deputise in certain circumstances, there's some elements that role doesn't pick up. You may see in other areas of the standing orders and financial regs where it says the town clerk or a nominated officer. So the nominated officer would not necessarily always be the deputy town clerk.
Thanks.
68. Move on to page 70.
This one.
Yeah, that's where it's. Oh,
So quite material changes here. Could you just explain some of the thinking behind it, just so we understand the context a little bit more, if that's okay?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So essentially, the key change here is 7.4. So the way in which our authorisation works at the moment. Well, actually, let's take a step back. So in order to have our financial regulations, we follow legislation and various financial conduct that we have to follow. We also follow good practice. So there's national shared financial regulations that come out in our parish and town sector that are reflected throughout here where they're relevant. Quite a lot of the national models are built for smaller town and parish councils. And again, these evolve over time. So the 7.4, what we have at the moment in terms of our payments and authorisations. So we want to carry out some work. Officer raises a purchase order. Purchase order gets approved through the line management. It then gets sent over to the supplier. That becomes essentially a contractor to carry out that work or to purchase that thing. We then goods receive it on our system. It gets approved for authorisation under our financial regulations. And then essentially throughout that process, we are committed contractually to pay for that. We've ordered it, we've received it, we've got to pay for it. So 7.4 is a kind of a hang up from a long time ago, where parish councils always used to do this. And that is there's this mechanism where we then send a list of payments to two councillors to look through to go, yes, they're okay to make those payments. Now, actually, it serves no purpose, that process whatsoever, because essentially there's nothing that can be done to stop those payments because they've already been purchased.
Yeah.
We've already received it. It's already been authorised. So it's something that is a hang up from a long, long time ago. And actually, the best practice now is completely changed on it. So most town councils, certainly of our size, don't have this mechanism. They leave that final authorisation to the sign off of the professional officers that are employed to do that. So that's 7.4. 7.2 is a deletion of those words just to reflect that change in 7.4, because essentially it will be the clerk or the RFO that will give instruction should you accept the change to 7.4. And then the other changes look quite a lot, but basically we're just tidying them up to have to a bit more plain English and a bit simpler. So previously we had four paragraphs that related to the way in which we could make payment. So we had a paragraph to say that in circumstances we could do by standing order, then the same paragraph saying backs, the same paragraph saying bank transfer, etc., etc. So basically the new 7.5 is if thought appropriate by the clerk and the RFO, we can make payments in the following ways, bullet points, and just get rid of a few areas of repetition. And then 7.11. So this basically reflects the fact that if any councillors were doing that authorisation, then they need to have certain antivirus security on their computers. And so if we aren't asking two councillors to do that, then we don't need that. It's not good practice anymore to do that. It's fraught with complications, to be honest. It's quite time consuming for us. It's quite time consuming for the two councillors that have to do it. Sometimes it holds up payments. Sometimes we have to make the payments anyway, and we're able to do so under other areas of financial regulations. This is just a bit dated, really. So we took the opportunity, and the reason why this is an addendum is actually there's been quite a lot of discussion recently around one of my national forums on this topic. There's all sorts on that forum, but this came up, and so we thought, as we're reviewing it now, and we've still got time to put this addendum forward, we may as well do so rather than wait until next year.
Right.
I'm all for last minute improvements to the agenda.
So can I just say on that one, I can see that in terms of trust, because ultimately, some councils must have had their fingers burnt in the past. There's no sort of protection for you guys, because I would say I would trust you 100%, but there's no protection for you guys if anyone did allege anything, because it hasn't been sort of cross-checked or signed off, or even if the signature means nothing, it just means that someone's gone, yeah, we have actually got that container, or we have got a skate park, or we have, do you know what I mean? And it's just, there's not a figure sort of going out that you've just sort of signed off and.
Yeah, so Chair, I mean, essentially the audit trail we've got is incredibly strong already.
Yeah.
And it's the substantial assurance in the internal audit reports that we've got year on year. So the layers are already there for that. And
you don't feel that you need that protection, is what I'm asking. I think.
No, not at all.
No.
And in many ways, it's arguably operating against our standing orders the way we are at the moment, because essentially no one individual councillor has the ability to act on behalf of the town council. So those putting that signature against them payments essentially is slight of a grey area anyway, because individual councillors can't act in that way. So yeah, I don't have any concerns from a kind of a protection point of view. I would add also we've got a council risk subcommittee which looks at reconciliation and all the payments. Everything comes through to CPF. So there's this kind of journey of everything that is probably more detailed than I've ever seen before, and it's probably too detailed in many ways. But this just feels like one extra thing that perhaps is just one step too far. So Dan, you might have a
No, I was just going to say about the council risk, where that's everything over £500 is reviewed there as well, and is available on the website.
Yeah, we have fun. £100 quid.
Doesn't get you much these days, does it?
Okay, well, thank you for that. I mean, it's an important change. I can see why you've included just some essentially kind of defects in the previous wording, Carl and Daniel, that you've sort of addressed. I think the previous context about the assurance advice they're getting is helpful context as well. Are there any other comments or questions from the councillors on this appendix?
I'm very happy with the amendment.
Okay, and thank you for the updates for that. Okay, so I think we'll move on to 72. You're just raising the limits for the growth in the size of the enterprise and stuff.
Yeah, with the amount, everything's gone up for inflation, it's just to reflect that.
Understood.
Yeah.
Okay, 73. '74.
I'm ever so sorry. Can I just go back to page 71 and
Sure.
7.13? Sorry. So you may have brilliant systems in place and procedures to keep everybody up to date with IT guidance, but that does need to just be kept in mind, doesn't it? So as appropriate security for passwords will be used in line with up-to-date IT guidance, and that does put some pressure on you to make sure that everybody is up to date with the IT guidance, because you may be thinking it's one thing. There might be a member of staff that was off a week last Tuesday and didn't do the training or whatever, and they don't know what the up-to-date IT guidance is. So they could get into bother without even realising, couldn't they?
Yeah, Chair, and I think that's a really good point. I think the other point that we make is that technology around security is changing all the time. So there's a danger we'd be bringing this back to you every meeting, because, you know, last year it was great to have facial recognition. This year it's no good to have that. And so by generalising that to say that we have security that's in line with the up-to-date IT guidance, we're just kind of covering for the ever-changing kind of world out there. We've got an IT provider and we've got very strong IT security.
And support in-house.
Lots of layers, lots of support. For our provider, a company called Cheeky Monkey. We have cybersecurity training that's rolled out. We have, much to the enjoyment of the officer team, we have a monthly kind of rogue email that gets pushed out to see who opens it and clicks a link, and just as part of our awareness side of things. So it's really just to generalise it, because otherwise you will be looking at this every time, because what's cool to do now won't be right to do next time.
Okay, so that's very helpful. So again, just being pedantic, under the new 710, would it not be better to just put appropriate security will be used? Because I don't think it's just passwords anymore. It's like, I don't know whether using VPNs or other sort of security devices, but I think the security encompasses more. The passwords is probably one element within a broader security framework.
Yeah, you could just delete the full passwords bit.
Appropriate security as a whole, in entirety, including passwords. I would just make that. Okay, so just moving back to page, I think it's 73. Questions on 73? 74? '75? 76. Questions on 77? Okay, I have a couple of questions on page 78 onwards, and maybe I just want to get the wording clear in my own head a little bit. So, section 15, we have contracts. And it sort of details a number of processes, but we talk about contracts and tendering. So, so to my mind, there's the tendering process where you're kind of going to market with a requirement, a request for a proposal, a sourcing process, however you want to describe it. And essentially you're selecting the vendor. But then there's the contract process. You've selected the vendor and you go through the contracting process to agree a contract. And I think that's a separate but related phase. And you've got other elements around the ordering, because you may have a framework agreement that gives you essentially like a catalogue of items. And you say, well, and then but there's no obligation to pay at that point. But then within that framework, you might have a specific order, like I need to chop down a tree or repair a fence or something. And I thought a couple of these areas, there was a bit of, so for example, I think, I don't know the 15 is it contract the right term? Because I think you've got the text, trying to use your language, and my word either when we talk about sourcing, but you talk about the tendering process. And I think you've got 15.1, you talk about procedures laid down as follows. And I think items 4 and 5 here. These regulations need not to apply to contracts. Now, I can understand that you probably don't have to go through a tendering process to execute 4 and 6, because essentially there is no competition. There is only one vendor. So you don't need to do a tendering process where you get in 4 or 5. But you still need a contract. You may bypass the tendering process, but you still have to agree a contract, whether it's on our paper or the supplier's paper. So I didn't know whether some of the wording here was as clear as it could be.
I think, Chair, this particular section aims to set out the approach to getting the contract as opposed to or contracting somebody, as opposed to details of the contract that they're delivering for you. So that second part, where it is a larger item, that would be something that tends to come through committee. So as an example, I gave the tree tender that comes through to CSC. Yeah. The CSC agree the tender specification, which is essentially our contract terms for what we're trying to get someone to deliver. If there needs to then be detailed agreement and conversations as to the content of the contract itself, then that would come through committee, unless the financial regulations allow us to agree that under the clauses that we've got in there.
Yeah, and I mean, so declaration, I sort of do a bit of this for a living at firm, so we could spend literally all day on this. But I'm just wondering, some of the language, I mean, section 15 is highlighted as contracts. I'm just wondering whether this refers to your tendering process, because your contract is essentially the outcome of the tendering process. And yes, I can understand where there's a good reason why you may want to you don't need to do a tendering process, but you still need a contract. And I wouldn't want section 15.1a to kind of mislead the reader by thinking, well, actually, so this falls into item 4, so I don't need a contract. You do need a contract, but you may not need to go through a tendering process. Right. Okay. Does that make sense?
It does, Chair. I think what may be useful, so because we're not suggesting any changes to this particular section, perhaps we can just bring back some clarity on this to the next meeting, because I'm slightly mindful. I think the terms of tendering and contracts in the world that you're used to may mean different things in local government. And so I just want to make sure that this section isn't part of one of the good practice within the model financial regulations for us. So if we're able just to consider the rest of the document as you are, and then we can certainly come back to that one with some guidance as to whether I completely understand the point you're making, and whether actually there is anything within the models or the way in which we work that would prevent us from re-clarifying some of the language.
So I just think through the process, and I'm sure it's consistent with good practice, but I thought it was important to make that distinction. I have some further comments on this. If I can keep going, so just on 79. I read it 3 times. I didn't understand what 15.1i means. I don't know if that's a sort of a copy paste from another document, but I couldn't sort of follow the logic of the wording on that. Perhaps it's maybe I'm just wondering whether maybe breaking it up into 2 sentences rather than one, or just sort of clarifying the wording might add to clarity on that point.
Reading that wording, I think that's going to come under the same sort of review. I'd have thought that would come from the.
Yeah, I just have a read through it, and I've obviously taken best practice, but just I think the plain English is a good. I'll just make sure that you can sort of explain that to your 15-year-old child or something. Just will be helpful to look at that. Also, in the table on 15.2, the estimated value of 25,000. It says minimum of 5. Do you mean a minimum of 5 quotes as opposed to invitations to tender? Because invitations to tender is 5 separate processes. I don't think you mean 5 separate processes. You want 5 separate responses from vendors. Is that the intention?
So is this the above 25,000?
Correct.
Chair? So no. So this is actually relates to public procurement. So in anything over £25,000, we have to make sure that we invite 5 potential tenderers to quote to tender.
I fully understand, and I think the wording implies you're going to do 5 invitation to tender processes as opposed to inviting 5 parties to tender.
Yeah. So in the public sector, invitations to tender mean one process to multiple people. So if we've got a tender, we need to ensure that at least 5 potential contractors are sent that tender.
So I think functionally we're on the same page, and that's fine. But again, if I look at the above line, you say minimum 3 quotes. You're using different language in the same table, which again is potentially confusing.
So basically, there's legislation that relates to public expenditure above £25,000.
Yeah.
That same legislation doesn't apply below that. So where we use quotes is a much more flexible way for us to procure work and supplies.
Yeah, it's like
compared to tenders. So tenders for us is a very detailed, lengthy process. A tender for us isn't just asking for 3 quotes. It's much more detailed to that.
Okay.
It's an open application as opposed to quotes you go to then.
Well, actually, I mean, there's about 12 different categories of tendering under procurement. Open, closed, open dialogue, and competitive dialogue. There's all different things within that that are relevant.
We approved all this last year, didn't we?
This is our current.
Your current one, I know, but we went through this process last year, and you probably looked into it a lot more than us. So unless there's a red note on here somewhere, nothing's changed. Yeah,
Unless we want to change it.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, but I was just checking.
Yeah. So okay, so
15.4 missing as well. I don't know whether that's just accidental, but I just thought I'd let you know.
correct, yeah. So I'll just give feedback. I think obviously we obey the law, we follow best practice. I just think plain English is another good principle to follow. I mean, I think we're on the same line sort of functionally. So above 25,000, you're inviting 5 parties to tender. But 5 invitations to tender kind of implies you're going to run 5 separate processes, which I don't think is the intention.
No, I agree with that. I think that language is completely lifted from the legislation.
Yeah.
So I think I agree it's not clear, but actually I don't think I'll double check, but I don't think we've got any flexibility with that.
Right. If it's the law,
what it means.
If it's the law, then fine. But I just wanted to provide clarity. And again, the 15.6 exceptions to these. I think these are regarding to exceptions to tender procedures as opposed to contract procedures. We still need, even if we buy something by auction, we still need a contract. the tender process is essentially the auction, but I'll just think through some of the language that we're using here, because I think we're saying that these items in 15.6, because of the nature of the market, you're not going to run a tender process, but again, you will still need a contract. I have some comments on 82. I'm just going to pause here and let anyone else have any comments. Okay, so just move on to page 81 and 82. So if I just look at 1513, I think this is fine. Again, I know we have an enterprise of a certain size. You do refer on 1511 that you've got a legal advisor. So I'm presuming that if I call it the legal parts of the contract that are going to cover things like title, warranties and indemnities, liability, there's some heavy legal items are covered there. And this is more of a sort of commercial set of instructions than a legal policy. I think just some other things to consider in 1513, because these are all sort of common sense sort of commercial items. I'll just consider adding acceptance criteria. So if a provider is completing a piece of work, how do you know when done is done? So it's good to have definition of the work, but having acceptance criteria allows both parties to say, yes, it's done. So I think if I just add the acceptance criteria. Also on point 2, I would add the payment schedule. So you need to, this is £100, but is it all in one go? Is it spread over 5 months? So just add the detail of the payment schedule, because again, that's going to help you with your invoicing process. That's going to help your vendor with their invoicing process, allows you to do the approvals. And then on 5, there's this point about the penalty. So do you have penalty contracts terms with every vendor, or is that only when it's appropriate?
I don't think it forms part of the standard template you use. Or is it? I don't remember. I think.
Yeah, so I mean,
certainly we're appropriate.
yeah, so 5 is in place. So every contract we do have does specify a penalty. There isn't a standard as to what the penalty will be, like a percentage or anything like that. But
Okay,
we're operating within that.
so, but again, I'm sorry, I'm being difficult, but going back to 15.6, right, so we're saying that those penalties would not apply to anything that we buy by auction or contracts with professional persons and so on. So we're saying that there's certain categories of spend where it's appropriate to include a penalty in the contract, but there's other categories where it isn't.
Yeah, Chair, I think the language needs to be clarified, because we're not actually trying to say that. So the 15.6 is exceptions to the procedures as to how we go about tendering or contracting, rather than the detail later on as to what's included in. So I think that's the language we need. I think we need a couple of new subheadings in here in the right place. Just split it down a little bit.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff here, and I think you're definitely along the right lines. I'll definitely sort of clarify the tender versus the contract process, because I think one follows on from the other. They are distinct. Again, within the contracts for themselves, just the point about the acceptance criteria, I think is very important. The payment schedule is vital for your invoicing and your payment process. I don't know what, again, probably for ongoing managed services, whether you want to include service levels, but whether the complexity of the services warrants that. But yeah, again, where appropriate.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, just put any other points up to page 82. 83. Right, just curious on the insurance limits, 5 million. When was that last reviewed?
I think we reviewed that now.
When I say reviewed, I mean sort of increased. It's wondering whether that's sort of.
I think that's expanded now. I can speak to the brokers and double check that.
Yeah.
I think that's the amount that generally required, I think, 5 million.
You just want to make sure it's, I mean, I don't know, I'm just want to check that it's fit for purpose and it's benchmark.
We're going through the insurance sheet renewal at the minute, so I can certainly flag that.
Obviously, I mean, the council's growing, we're taking more assets and more liabilities and so on.
Yeah, so Chair, just an observation on that one. So the key word there is minimum, because there are some work areas that it is suitable for the contractor or client to have just 5 million. And there are some, particularly say third party event organisers, where you have to have a minimum liability of 10 public. So I think the language is right on that. I think part of your question is about actually our insurance, isn't it? What our own cover is. Was that where you were kind of alluding to there, Chair?
There's actually both. I was actually thinking about third parties, because you're right. We're running big events now. But I was actually taking the literal sort of wording in 19.6. But our own liabilities, that covered. Well, this is related to our contract, which by definition is looking at third party insurance. Yeah, that's fine. So move on to 85. '86. Okay, good. So a big pause for the intake of breath. I think we've done the financial regs. So we'll move on to Appendix B, the standing orders. And if everyone's okay, I'll just follow the same process. I'll sort of push us along sort of page by page. So call out if you've got any comments or questions. So starting on page 87. And 88. Page 89. So I have a question on 1.T regarding interests, and it seems to me where we have a number of councillors who might also be county councillors or town councillors, that there's a potential conflict of interest in certain circumstances. I know, Carl, you and I have spoken about that a couple of times. I'm just wondering whether the regs here need to be more explicit in accounting for that, because what I don't feel particularly comfortable with, Carl, is giving you too much discretion over that, because I think there are some issues where it's quite clear. I think there's a conflict of interest. I think we just need to make it safe for people to say that if certainly if you're a town council and a county council issue comes up and you're both, just to make it safe for people that they are recused from the conversation. I think at the moment there's a bit too much subjectivity put on your shoulders.
Yeah, so Chair, I need to be clear that there's no discretion placed on me. So register of interest and declarations of interest is completely down to the individual councillor to decide whether they believe they've got one or not.
Yeah.
I get questions from individuals as to do you think I have, and I can give advice and guidance. It'll always start with a line and finish with a line. It is up to you as an individual to decide, and I'll repeat that at the end. So I have no discretion over that at all. It's subjective down to the individual councillors. Section T there is in bold, so that's legislation, so it can't be changed. And we couldn't add anything that would be in conflict with what legislation says either.
We can supplement it though.
Not to change any meaning to it. So you can't, we as a council, we can't place any restrictions on any individuals around declarations of interest that go beyond what.
But if you look at the declarations of interest for the town councillors, and I have, there is inconsistent reporting of declarations of interest. So some are saying I'm a district councillor, others are not. And actually, if you look at the district councillor declarations of interest that I have, some are declaring that they're county councillors and others are not. So it doesn't seem safe for the individual to kind of, with all due respect, kind of make it up without any clear guidance, instead of in terms of saying you either are or you aren't, because we've let a variable, and two reasonable people can disagree. Yeah, Councillor Bishop.
And that happens in the legal world as well. You get judges sitting on cases who might decide that they have a declaration of interest on something because they might, for example, belong to Amnesty International. Yeah, we've seen that happen. And one party might think that that actually does influence how they're going to exercise their discretion in a particular case. And it is just down to the individual to make the right call and trust their judgment. And if someone disagrees, then there might be a debate about it. There might be an argument in front of the judge, but ultimately, they have to make the right call. And I think it's exactly the same with the legislation. Well, I don't know what the legislation is in that respect, but it would seem very similar.
Chair, your observation in that there are lots of inconsistencies, if you took a sample of codes of conduct across the country, you would see that. I mean, that's accurate, but that's because of the way that the legislation is set up, that it's up to the individual to decide and to put forward their argument as to whether they think they are conflicted or not in any given case. But from a council as a body point of view, we can't supplement that restricts people in any way, any individuals in any way whatsoever.
Okay, so it's up to the individual to decide I either am or am not.
Absolutely, in line with what they've stated on their register of interest.
Which in itself might be inconsistent.
Correct.
Okay.
Is there an opportunity, because obviously if you're in for 4 years, that might change. So is there like a checking point every 12 months or something to say, here's an opportunity to update if you just bought loads of allotments and we're about to give some management or whatever it might be? Is there an opportunity to do that? Or
Yeah, so the code of conduct says that individuals should regularly review their register of interest if their circumstances change.
it's just as and when rather
Yeah,
than
you should do. Yeah, I mean we formally don't put a moment in time when we chase because it's not our role, and in some ways we could get ourselves in a bit of bother. But it does come up regularly, and in this discussion here, I would encourage you all to look at your register of interest and make sure nothing's changed, because things do change, and perhaps take a look at where some colleagues may have logged certain interest in certain columns, and if yours is different, perhaps have a conversation as to why that might be different. Of course, I've always got a view on things. I could tell you where I think things should go, but it's not for me to do that because it's up to the individual. No, of course, I have to be really careful about doing that because we're talking about something that's quite serious. So there is, as I said to Councillor Scott before, there is exceptions to this. So that if the town council was taking a key decision and a declaration wasn't made that I felt should have been made, and there is the risk that the town council decision could be called into question, then I would potentially intercept, or have done in the past at committee or council, where I may say something like, Councillor Bloggs, would you wish to consider a declaration of interest given your role at? But that's exceptional circumstances where the town council decision could be called into question.
Yeah.
So obviously that's my consideration as the council's body.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay. Okay, right, happy to leave it there. And Carl, thank you as ever for your counsel. Okay, moving on from page 90. And 91. And 92.
Can you please remove men from the chair and the vice chair, please? 6.
Yes, I support that. We do a search replace all on the document just to make sure we've covered that.
Yeah, Chair, we certainly will. The only caveat, and this sounds pedantic, if it's something in bold, we can't change it, even if it clearly should be.
Yeah.
But we will do that on everything else.
Understood, thank you. Okay, move on to page 93. We on to 94. Page 95. Could I ask a point on 17.2, please? It says at least 7 clear days. Now, are those, what's the currency that we use in the document? Is it working days or calendar days? Do we need to be consistent?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, Chair. It varies, and it deliberately varies because there are some bits of legislation where we have to state working days. Where we aren't restricted, we tend to say clear days because that gives more flexibility in many ways to people and to the council. So we can't standardise it.
So we can't standardise the legislation. That is what it is.
Yeah,
but we can standardise our own documents.
Where it would be on an individual basis, where I'd have to look at each particular line and say whether it is the right thing for the council to do. So, for example, when we're talking about motions and things that are going to impact an agenda, the agenda has to go out on a certain time. So if we started to change working days to clear days, that could then impact on other elements of the legislation that we have to deliver against. So we could look at each of these. I mean, I don't know what's preferenced. I don't know whether there's a preference between working days and clear days, and it hasn't been an issue with it in the past, but we can certainly look at it.
I think sometimes injecting a bit of flexibility is not a bad thing, especially if it's not going to be strictly adhered to. If Carl's not going to turn around and say we didn't do it in 7 clear days, it was working days, or vice versa, then it's to everyone's benefit, isn't it?
Well, I think flexibility is good, but I think misunderstandings are not good. So, for example, Kirsty and I could look at the same sentence and come up with a different interpretation, and Kirsty's interpretation could be just as valid as mine, but it's different. That happens all the time. And I think it's very important in these policy documents, because they are a source of legitimacy, that they are as clear as they can be. So there's no misinterpretation. So if possible, I would just prefer a standard currency. We call it working or calendar days, and I don't mind which, but I think the term clear days, to me, I don't know if that includes weekends or bank holidays. I don't know. And I think, we could have a debate about this and we'd end up being confused.
I think, Chair, that's one for us to take away and come back with a bit of clarity on the definitions that we're talking about here. I wouldn't be able to confidently now agree anything that might not actually cause the council some problems.
So my request is, could we have a consistent currency, please? And I think being consistent with, so if the legislation is consistent, they typically use working on calendar days. Let's just try and use the same. Just so we have a consistent currency of time.
Yeah, I appreciate the point, Chair. What I'm saying is it may not be suitable. You may not, in hindsight, if I go through details of examples where you may not want consistency, you might look at it and go, actually, we don't want that. So what I'd rather do is come back with examples of where it's referenced in each of these clauses. And if we look at it and go, actually, a sort of a standard currency won't cause any issues, then fine. But I wouldn't want you to approve that now. And then we look at it in hindsight and go, well, I wish we didn't have that flexibility on motions or on public participation. And it's in the committee's right. If you wish us to do that, we can do, but you'd be doing it uninformed as to the implications.
I completely get that. I think that the situation I'd want to avoid here in 17.2 is a councillor thinking, oh my goodness, I've got 7 calendar days. I've got 7 business days to submit this motion. Which is 9 calendar days, and actually the chair would interpret this as being 7 calendar days, and so there'd be a mismatch, and the council would be saying, well, the chair will be telling the council, no, you've missed the deadline, you're 2 days out. That's not flexibility, that's you're generating a dispute. At that point, I want to avoid that.
Chair, it is specific there. It says clear days do not include the day of the notice or the day of the meeting. So that,
do they include bank holidays and weekends?
Yeah,
that's my point.
Yeah,
there's a lot of times it's not clarified as the date of when it's due. So rather than saying it's this many days, it's due on the 14th or whatever it is. And then it's informed, and then you can count back whether it's calendar days or not. Because if you get a date when it's due.
So, Chair, I think you've got 2 options. You could agree a blanket approach now to change them all to a current currency, and then we will apply that, and then we'll probably come back to committee next time advising where you may want to look at them again if that doesn't fit with flexibility that you may wish. Or you could do it the other way around, where we could note that point. You could ask us to go and look to see if there's implications of having a standard currency. Bring that back to the next meeting, and you agree what you wish to do.
Yes.
That's your two
So
options.
my proposal, which I'd like to test with the councillors, is that you give us your advice on the preferred common currency. So whether it's calendar days, working days, whatever you think is consistent with legislation and other practice. But I would like to see a common currency, so we know that a day is a day, and there's no confusion.
Can I make an alternative proposal?
Please.
Can I ask Carl to flag if this is an issue over the next year, then when we're all sat back round here next year, knowing that these have been standing orders for a full year and it hasn't been an issue, when we're sat back here next year, if it's been an issue and it has caused a dispute or even a discussion more than once, then we look at it then, rather than, I think, potentially creating a lot of work behind the scenes, looking through various pieces of legislation to try and reach something that we might actually not need to address. There's a work and, there's a balance to strike with how much work we're asking Carl to do if this is never an issue. In my view, that would be my proposal, to review it.
Okay, that's a fair comment. Any other comments from the floor?
I'm with Beth on that.
Okay. Let's go with that. So if we just note, let's just keep track of this, and if it flares up, then we'll.
If anyone has any clear days, and that's given to me, I'd love a clear day.
Right. Thank you very much.
They don't exist often.
Good debates. So moving on to 95, 96. '97. Page 98. So, Carl, as I think sort of evidenced by the start of the meeting, I think we just, if you look at section 20, I think there's something missing here, which is essentially to allow the chair the discretion of accepting questions from people to speak, even though they haven't received any notice. Now, we do allow that right in the planning committee under 21.1E, and it seems to be reasonable that the chair is given the same discretion in other council committee meetings as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're able to do that as committee.
Is there any reason why we would? Is there any reason for the difference between 20 and 21 on that point?
There is. The key difference is the planning committee, when they're allowed to speak, it's on a specific item that's on the agenda. I think the challenge is that we've seen in lots of places elsewhere is that when there is discretion given to the chair, bearing in mind an individual councillor can't have individual powers under legislation, that can be open to abuse. And it's been seen in other places where individual councillors have brought forward topics that is completely left field to anything that's going on anywhere, and have abused that essentially. So the stages set out here is to offer protection, because there may be times when the council or committee may not wish to have public participation from some individuals. There are also some councils that have certain individuals that do certain things at council meetings and bring forward certain topics, and so that there's an element of kind of the notice period gives some protection to the council as well. There's famously a council, perhaps not so far away, who used to have a chap dressed up as a rabbit regularly coming along in relation to rabbits on his allotment, and I think the council in question changed their constitution around public speaking to help prevent that. So I think discretion, in my view, is already set out within the standing orders under the urgent item element. So if there is an urgent item that is genuinely urgent that needs to be discussed, that provides the mechanism for that discussion and debate. But having said that, the committee could give that discretion to the chair.
Okay. Thoughts from the floor?
The chance to raise something with only a day's notice and no later than midday just gives people, I think, just that time for reflection, sort of sleeping on it. And then if they're really keen to come back the next day and make their point live, then they can do it, can't they? As opposed to people just finding out that there's a meeting going on and then barging in and ranting without having that pause for thought.
Well, I guess the challenge is that these meetings are not the next day. The next Corporate Policy Finance Committee meeting, I think, is in September. So if we take the live example of Fiona there, who I think had a legitimate series of points to make, if we had not allowed her to speak tonight, that would have been September before we'd allowed to speak to us again.
But there was enough flexibility in the sorry.
Sorry, we did that outside the standing orders.
Correct. Yeah.
That was my point. There's enough flexibility in it. We managed to do it. Anyway.
But we had to adjourn the meeting. I think, Carl, you managed it very well. So I'm just trying to make sure the process works to serve us, and particularly the process allows us to serve the community. And hopefully not everyone's going to turn up in a rabbit suit. But I felt this is an example of someone who's paying a lot of money in business rates, and I think it's an important part of our community, had a legitimate point to make, and I think it was valid that she was allowed to speak. Even though, yes, I think you're probably right, Carl. Ideally, she would have got in touch with you a day or two beforehand just to say, "Hey, Carl, can I speak in front of the council?"
But then, if that is ideally, and it is ideal, because the town clerk does need to know who's pitching up to the town hall to come into meetings. So we are searching for ideal, aren't we? We are searching for best practice, and I think just we have heard and that's happened.
I don't feel we need to change the rules, but I do think we did the right thing today to let us speak, because it's not like it doesn't. Like the reason why it's for planning is because you're heard on that one day and there's no future opportunity.
Yeah.
Your case doesn't come up again. Whereas in the more regular meetings, I know this is 3 months and it's too far away. Yeah. So I think we did the right thing there, but I do think it's catered for in the current regulations. And I thought it was very well handled. So.
Okay. Very good, thank you. Any other comments?
I do have a suggestion on a slightly linked point, but under E, or in fact that whole section, it talks about a resident. So in theory, there could be a scenario where you may wish to hear from a local business owner who isn't a resident. And so in effect, just reflecting on this, actually under the standing orders at the moment, they wouldn't be allowed to speak if they lived elsewhere.
Yeah.
So you may wish to do something on E that says something like a resident or individual with legitimate local interest wishing to ask a question. Just thinking,
Nice addition.
thinking on the hop here that we might accidentally rule people out.
That's a good suggestion. Thank you.
And there is, Chair, an element of protection for individual councillors in this by having some pre-warning as to who may be coming. Yeah. There have been examples in the past where people have turned up to question individual councillors. And so actually it's in your interest as well to be aware that may well be happening. So they may legitimately be able to come and do that. But there's a kind of an element of heads up that we all really benefit from a lot of the time.
That's a fair comment. Thank you.
Yes, and when there are some people, I'm thinking of that guy over the road there that was complaining about being blocked in by the market. Do you remember him?
Yeah,
He
Chair,
just would not shut up.
Yeah.
Just kept going home and home.
For 3 minutes it applied to him.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, I think it's a good example. There are individuals that come along that for certain motives, and so you want to offer some protection to council and yourselves from experience.
And there's also an opportunity for us as well, if they're raising a point that we hadn't thought of before, and we are all just human, we won't necessarily have thought of everything. It just gives us that little bit of time, doesn't it? Maybe to find a really straightforward answer or an answer, or just be able to get in touch with them and maybe
I think that's a really good point, Chair.
actually assist them.
So where we have had public participation in the past, what we always try to avoid is the kind of we can't comment now and we'll get back to you kind of thing.
Yeah.
So if you look back at, I've had some examples of minutes in the past where we have been pre-warned, there's a very clear topic, we're able to provide an answer on the day. And it is helpful in that sense. It's more helpful for residents or the person coming forward. So that's a good point.
Thank you. Any more questions on page 98?
I've got nothing for the rest of the, that section, just
Okay.
what we-
So
Okay,
again,
does anyone
very
else
conscious of
have
time
anything?
and energy levels. I'm happy to sort of fast forward to the end of the document, which is clearly a mature document. So just moving up to the end of page 106, which I think is the end of the standing order. Are there any further comments up to and including page 106, please?
Do we do number 40 on page 104? Do we do that?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great.
Well, Chair, let me slightly refine that. Yes, we should still be doing that. Let me double check. So how we used to do it, it won't be that way. We used to send packs out to the individual county district councils. We don't do that anymore, but we certainly should still be notifying them of agendas. We certainly liaise with them. We're in regular contact. That's for sure.
Right, final call for comments on the standing orders. Right, okay, so if I go back to the what are being asked to do? So we've had a good discussion, I think. Thank you everyone for very helpful comments and responses. So if I go back to the exam question. Right, so I think we're being asked to approve the revised financial regulations with the comments that we've provided, and I think we've made a couple of small amendments to the standing orders, which I think we've noted as well.
I'm
So-
fine with that, yeah.
Everyone okay to vote through the changes to both documents, financial regs and standing orders?
Yeah.
2 for 1. Right, thank you. Right, flags.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So there's not a lot for me to add here, so it's just a report to the committee to approve on the various flags and the dates that the flags will be flying on.
I have a question. Is this just additional ones, or is this the full? I assume this isn't the full year. Is it the full year?
It's the full year.
Well, there's the-
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and then there's some additional sort of King's birthday. And
Yeah. Do we celebrate women's rights in any way?
Is it international?
So it's the International Women's Day. It's International Men's Day as well. I don't know what their flags look like in great detail. I can probably tell you the colours of them.
I mean, I did actually propose that on an earlier week. I wasn't sure if there's a flag. I might be completely wrong.
I don't know. I'd just like it to be investigated, please. That's all.
Agreed.
Unless anyone
Yep.
wants to have a conversation about it.
Any other comments from the floor? On the flags? Okay, just a couple of comments, please. So first of all, thank you for updating this. A couple of updates. So the Europe flag is actually the Council of Europe, which for the record was, I think, established by Winston Churchill before the European Union. So it's very much a British, not a foreign flag. So that's the 5th of May. So that's the Council of Europe. And again, just to some other suggestions, and I hope these will be okay with everyone. I mean, I would also propose NATO Day, which is the 4th of April, which provides the foundation of our security here in Europe, and we are a founder member of NATO. Ukraine Independence Day, which is the 24th of August, and I think this country is obviously directly supporting Ukraine in its fight for independence. And finally, the United Nations Day, which I believe is 24th of October. And again, the UK is both a founder member and we're a permanent member of the Security Council. So I think those would be consistent with sort of Harvard and sort of mission and culture and values and stuff.
I think we did the United Nations Day, don't we?
I think that, so it's actually mentioned in the preamble to the document, but it doesn't appear on
Because
the
I
list.
remember putting the flag up.
It's just omitted from.
So it does actually appear under 3.3. I think, no, not, if you remember the UN, yes, the 3.1, it mentions UN Day.
I think that's essentially a typo. That we actually want to have in.
Okay, so we're being asked to sort of consider and approve the dates. So I'm proposing adding NATO, Ukraine, and UN Day to the list.
Can we do each one individually? Can we?
And
do for
and
each
let's
one?
investigate the flags for Women's and Men's Days.
Not because I don't want Ukraine not to be independent. It isn't anything I've looked into or been involved in. And there are lots of other countries around the world that are fighting for their independence. I do. My only question I suppose is why Ukraine and why not?
Is there going to be any clashes?
Clashes with.
No dates. I mean,
So the Ukrainian Independence Day is the 24th of August. So I don't think there's any date clashes.
I think Beth just say, can we just go through the list? Oh yeah, just vote on each one.
Vote on each one individually. Rather than as a group.
That's fair enough. Okay. So should we start with NATO Day? So all those in favour of adding NATO Day to the agenda? The majority.
Sorry, can you abstaining or you?
see,
Okay.
Yep.
And to add Ukraine Day of Independence to the list? Three. So that, and against? So we've got 3 for, 1 against. Abstentions? 2 abstentions. Okay. United Nations Day, all those in favour? It's unanimous. And on the basis that we can find an appropriate flag, and so all those in favour of, I think we should add men and women as a combination. I wouldn't have one.
Oh, no, without the other.
So all those in
Maybe
favour of,
someone.
all those in favour of adding to the appropriate flags for men's and women's day. Okay. Brief as well. Good. So next item is our update from Citizens Advice.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is the last set of monitoring figures that you will receive under the old SLA when the new SLA kicks in, is already kicked in. So at the next meeting, you'll receive updated monitoring figures based on the new SLA, which is the £12,000 which we agreed. So this is the last one that's on the old SLA of £5,000. But let's take any questions.
All those in favour of noting the report from the Citizens Advice Group? Thank you. Okay, I think this is the final item. So we've got 2 grant applications.
That's correct, Chair.
Please.
So the full applications are presented in the report, but this is for 2 applications of community grants. The first is for 2,000 to enable Harpen and Mencap to establish an allotment club in Southdown. The breakdown of their costs can be seen on page 123 of your pack. The second is for £1,760 to enable Imagination Dance to set up a SEND dance and movement class in Harpenden. And a breakdown of their costs can be seen on page 129 of your pack.
Questions, please. Councillor Bishop.
Chair, I just wanted to clarify 4.2, page 117. Because 4.3 says if we grant both of these, and I don't want to preempt the decision at all, obviously that's up to everybody here, but then we would only have 240 left unallocated. So I just wanted to check, I just wanted to check the period that would be for, and then if you could explain, Dan, for me, sorry,
That's right.
4.2.
So where we've got, so if you like, we've got the annual revenue budget, £4,000 that we can allocate to grants, but we've also got funds in earmarked reserves that we can also use. So if we get further applications throughout the year, we can draw down on the earmarked reserve. So I think we've got an additional £4,000 in earmarked reserve that's already been previously approved that we can spend, but there's a further funds in there that we could ask to be drawn down. So if a decision was to be taken tonight that both of those applications were successful, then there is still funds for this year to further grants could be applied for.
When's the year end? When would that expire?
End of March. End of March. That's correct, Chair.
Right, yeah.
So
Thank you.
obviously, once the earmarked reserves has gone, it won't come back unless we add money to it. But for this year, we've certainly got enough funds to consider any future applications throughout the year.
Thank you. Okay.
So I have a general question about these. We seem to be sort of funding their entire project.
Which one's that?
Well, for both of them. So
Yeah.
they've got a project and they're all good projects, but they seem to be coming to us for all of the funding for the entire project. And the second application in particular is a social interest enterprise where they have net current assets are over £20,000, and I know they'll have other sort of demands upon their balance sheets and so on. But I guess it's just a question I'd like to pose to the councillors in general and the officers as well is, in terms of a consistent policy, would we want to be funding the entire project? Because potentially our money could be leveraged more effectively if we say funded a quarter. I'm just picking percentages here. We would sort of fund a quarter or a half on the basis they would have to match that contribution from other donors, because that allows us to spread what budget we have, and this is taxpayers' money, more over a wider number of causes throughout the year. Part of me just feels, okay, if we sort of, say yes to these requests in full now, that obviously leaves less available for other potentially equally deserving causes that may be applying later on in the year. I'm just curious to get people's opinions on that. Councillor Martin.
Before it goes on, then how do they normally come in? Is it a case of there's an application period, or is it a case of that it's open?
It's open, so the details are on our website, so people just go on there and
As and when they want to.
just apply and submit their applications.
And then if it's all given out before that someone applies, then it's gone and there's nothing left, and so be it.
Chair, just on that point, Chair, it has been looked at in the past as to whether we should have an application period enclosed. There's lots of positives to that. The downside of doing that is you often generate a load of demand, and you end up letting a lot of people down on organisations, which is the opposite of what you often want. So it's a very difficult one, given the sums of money overall we've got. I mean, it's good in many ways, but it's not a £50,000 pot every year that can serve loads of people. So it's difficult to get the balance, Chair, sometimes as to the open-ended versus kind of a clear apply button.
That's a dilemma.
I was just thinking it makes a harder choice if you don't know this. So if there's 240 quid left, you think, or someone else might come along down the line and they want another £4,000, but then someone else might not turn up. So you've just got a surplus of 240 quid. If you had a closing
There's
period.
8,230
Yeah.
in a bank account somewhere.
It's about taking each application on its merits and looking,
Rather
as
than-
we've done before, at what applications are the sort of thing that have been made before, I think.
Okay.
Councillor Ellis, could I ask, are there any sort of, in your experience, are there any kind of good rules of thumb, or because obviously I think we're barely at the end of the first quarter, and I think obviously spending too much of our budget for the full year at this stage makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable. I'm sure there's other good candidates would come up in the rest of the financial year. Do you sort of try and earmark a certain sort of allocation each quarter?
I think I chaired the Grants Planner District for a number of years, and the lady there, who I think Carl knows, is very good on this sort of stuff, and she used to work in the third sector anyway. And they've got a set of rules which do include things like how much are you financing as a part of the total project.
Mm.
I don't think we've got that at the moment. You know, we could probably benefit from, you know, their experience in doing it because they have substantially more funds. They have a fixed period for allocations and they're always heavily oversubscribed.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to say what are the corporate objectives and does this meet up?
Yes.
Of them, you know, community engagement and all that sort of stuff. And then how much can be allocated. And there are 4, it's much more complicated than us because they've got 4 grant streams. You know, one is for service level agreements with people like Citizens Advice, 2 or 3 other organisations that, you know, that where you give them a certain amount of money and they help all sorts of other charities to apply for grants from other sources. So you get a leveraging effect, which is quite impressive. And it's about 4 to 1, 5 to 1, something.
And that allows you to support a larger number of causes throughout the year.
Indirectly.
Yeah, exactly.
So that works quite well. Yeah, I think they've got a good process at district. I think you could learn from that.
Yeah. Do you think it would make sense for this committee to establish our own sort of guidelines,
Yes.
rules of thumb? Yeah.
Yes. So you can judge it against your policy as they come in.
Okay. Would it make sense for us to ask our officers to draw up a sort of simple guidelines that we could use to follow to judge these? Because I think we've just made sure we're assessing the applications in a consistent manner.
We do that last time.
There was the community grant criteria review that we did.
Yeah.
I think,
Is that, do we complete that?
Yeah, Chair. So you completed the criteria. I think the criteria is still quite broad, which is is good and bad. I think partly what we may be able to help with is a set of criteria around assessment as well, to help you kind of go through that side of things, almost some sort of scoring potentially that's in a bit more detail than it is at the moment. You have got the criteria, which is broadly just linked to the existing business plan, which in itself is very broad.
Yeah.
So
Can I ask, I'm not normally here, but in ignoring these applications, would you ever grant less than what has been applied for? So if someone says they want £1,000, you go, oh, actually, we validate this at 500 quid, will submit that. You do?
that's happened before.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
So that was one of the questions I had in relation to the second application, was the cost of the hall and actually specifically where the hall was going to be. Because there's reference to the Harpenden area. And then I looked at the cost for Park Hall, for example, because I thought, have we got somewhere a venue that we'd be able to offer and do it as a support?
Yeah.
So instead of just throwing cash at them to hire a hall.
The asset.
And so I looked at the cost of different locations, and 32 sort of seemed a little bit. But obviously, if you've got children with special needs and potentially disabilities and things like that, maybe they're looking for somewhere quite specific. So I sort of backtracked on that, but it was thinking along exactly those lines.
When I spoke to them, they said they've got a relationship with Harpenden Trust Hall, so that was the site that they were intending to use.
So then, in a way, you're sort of giving back a bit as well, aren't you? You know, by giving them the charity grant, they're then supporting a charity because the charity will be using the money for that. So it does all come around. How do we want to do this? Do we want to talk about each one separately, or? As an aside, I thought the form worked well. It set it all out, made it really clear. I knew who was asking for what it was all for, their intentions, who was benefiting. Definitely an improvement on what we've seen in the last couple of meetings. Yeah, apart from those 2 little bits of information, answered most of my questions.
Once we've made the grant, do we check up that it's been applied appropriately?
Yes, we do. So when other grants have been issued, so for example, when they gave a grant to the swimming club for the laptops a few years ago, it was a proof of purchase that they did that with the dog sanctuary last time, they've sent us pictures of the all the works that the site before, during, and after. So monitoring information is collated.
So just to understand section 4 correctly, Daniel, so we've got a full £4,000 allocation for this financial year. And does 4.2 means we've got an additional £4,000? So effectively our budget for this year is £8,000. Is that?
That's correct.
The right way
Yeah.
to
So for this year, yes, but once that £4,000 in 4.2 is spent,
It's all replenished.
Exactly.
Right.
Whereas the £4,000 in 4.1, this time next year, you'll have a fresh £4,000, but you may
Right.
not, depending on how we go for the rest of this financial year, the money in 4.2 won't be.
Yes, you're right. And that's a very important distinction between those two numbers, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I guess as a general point, I mean, if let's put the second 4,000 to one side. I guess that's kind of the rainy day fund. I mean, if there's £4,000 budget for this year is 1,000 a quarter, it does seem that spending, nearly 4,000, almost our entire budget in one quarter seems like we're making it hard for those equally deserving causes that may arrive later on in the year. So I would be minded to sort of stick to like 1,000 a quarter as an outline budget for our grants as a rule of thumb.
My question would be, I don't agree with that, but just as a slightly different perspective, if, for example, if we take the first one, if we only gave them 500, for example, would that mean that wouldn't happen? So then what's happening to the 500?
Yeah, Chair. So that has happened in the past where we've offered a sort of a proportion of what they've been asked, and they've come back and said, based on that, we can't deliver the project. So the committee historically has either then revisited it and funded a full amount, or has actually said no, we're sticking what we said first time. That could happen.
Yeah.
We're looking at always trying to secure funding from other people. Sort of 50-50 to complete that with other ventures in.
Yeah, we do. So when there is known funding that can come down through town and parish councils, we try to get hold of it. Fortunately, a lot of the funding that comes down to local authorities to distribute stops at the principal authority level, so the district council and the council. So it actually is something that our part of the sector is lobbying heavy for to change, so that when these opportunities from government come down to the local areas, they come down to our tier. So, as an example, so on the at the start of the cost of living crisis, when there was funding that came down around energy grants and food grants, that was the first time really that the guidance allowed town and parish councils to distribute it. So we got £5,000, which we distributed to families for food vouchers, energy vouchers, and as a sector, we're trying to ensure future governments do that more regularly. So we do seek it, and when we get it, we try and get how it works. Yeah. Good.
Okay, I'm just conscious of time because we are running over, and there's probably all of us would like to finish at some point. Are there any particular thoughts on this? Because we could spend a long time discussing this. I'm just wondering whether there's a way to get to it.
I don't know the answer to the how we get to this. My instinct was yes for the first one, whether that's the full amount or part amount. Second one, I was slightly confused by the amount they put in the bank and why they said if they had to fund it all from their, I can't remember the exact words they used, but if we had to fund it all, then it wouldn't happen. Possibility of closing the class would be higher if we had to fund the class from our own funds. It's hugely important that we've got financial support for the opening of any new branch.